Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone out there in the internet world. Welcome to Truth Be Told. A couple of handsome young guys you're looking at on the screen. One has hair, one doesn't. One has a mustache and one wish he could grow one.
Nice.
Welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube page. Mike Maney and Rick Howard. We live about, what are we, about 1,500 miles apart?
I think so. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Today is session number 46, March the 2nd, 2022. So session 46, and Mike just told me we have 51 subscribers.
Yes.
So our goal is to always have more subscribers than sessions. So somehow in the next couple of months, we're going to have to go beg people to subscribe.
Yes. Yes.
And
we're going to do the missionary roundup. You know, missionaries round up their numbers. So we are well on our way to 100.
Maybe at some point, I don't know, when can you monetize a YouTube page? It probably has to be like, 20 times more than over 100.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I think we may we may be how should we say, with the Lord before we'd ever have the numbers.
Yes.
We could
yeah.
think about monetizing this. So obviously we're not lining our pockets with this YouTube page, but hopefully we are lining your brains and your hearts.
Yes.
With the information that you hear.
Yes.
And I just talked with a good young brother on the phone before we started our session. And so it would disappoint him greatly if we didn't spend just a few minutes talking about the weather and politics.
That's the main feature.
It is beautiful here in Modesto area. This time of year is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The last few weeks of February, the first few weeks of March, all the almond orchards are in full white bloom. Mm-hmm. Just oceans of white blooms, bees everywhere pollinating them.
Yeah.
Now the peach trees are in full bloom and they are pink.
Oh.
And it's just, unless you have allergy problems, people do. Fortunately, I don't. So I can enjoy the beauty of it without, taking allergy medication. But in our backyard, we've been having we need rain and snow, but we've been having a lot of really nice, warm spring kind of days. And so the flowers and plants in our backyard are just looking great. And sit out there some late afternoons when it's nice and warm. And my wife has quite a few bird feeders, hummingbird feeders, and all sorts of plants that attract birds. And so we identify the different birds and just nice. Kind of, relax and enjoy God's creation for a few minutes. And we look forward to that. I know that's old folks kind of talk. And I never thought I would go online and say that I really enjoy sitting in my backyard looking at birds. But I remember even as a young boy growing up, I would like laying on my back in our backyard, staring up at the sky right about sunset. This always seems to be when the most birds are flying overhead. And I just lay there looking at the birds. So I guess I've always had some sort of identifying and looking at birds. And so they seem to be happy in our backyard. We have anywhere from 2 to a dozen doves, pairs of doves. And they come around eating the food, and all sorts of sparrows and finches, goldfinches, red finches, all sorts of, we have some mockingbirds. Certain times of year we have bluebirds and robins. Of course, hummingbirds zipping all over the place. She has like 5 or so hummingbird feeders spread around. And we hardly ever have 5 hummingbirds at one time. But even if we just have 2, and there's 5 feeders, that one hummingbird will chase away the other hummingbird off that one feeder. They're very aggressive toward each other.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow. You should have your phone camera ready.
Yeah, I should. Huh?
While you sit out there, just hit a record, just film some of them.
And my wife's already planting some vegetables. We made some raised beds last year, so she planted some lettuces and some. And she bought these grow bags. They're called.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like a stronger version of like a burlap bag.
Mm-hmm.
And you just fill it full of soil. And she planted. Then you just put it wherever you want.
Mm-hmm.
She planted some potatoes. And she planted some bell peppers in those. You just kind of move it around through different parts of the year, wherever it gets the best sun and everything.
Yeah.
And then after you harvest it, you can just keep reusing the bags over and over and over. So it's kind of nice.
Well, I was thinking you could transitioning from that to our world situation right now. You may want to begin to learn how to become preppers.
I've always thought I should do more prepping,
but
we just never have.
Mm-hmm.
Because of COVID, like everyone else, we stocked up on toilet paper,
yes,
towels, and bottled water and stuff like that.
Yes.
I don't know why, but we did. And our cupboards are pretty full of canned goods, and freezers full of other frozen stuff. So we could hold out for several weeks.
Yeah.
But we haven't bought a generator. We haven't bought ready to eat meals, that last for years.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't stocked up on guns.
Yeah. Right.
And every once in a while, people in our own church and other churches who are more into that than I am, they'll encourage me to do, prep more.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be the correct response, but my whole thing is we have enough for a few weeks. And if it gets to where we need to hunker in place, and hide out for more than 2 weeks, there's going to be a whole lot more major problems than do I have more bottled water or canned food. After a couple of weeks, there's going to be total chaos everywhere.
Well, I'm thinking that as long as your cupboards are stocked with canned food and candy, you're good to go. And when the candy runs out, I'm just going to give myself up. I just turn myself in.
That's when you start praying for the pre-tribulation rapture to be true.
Well, it looks like we're getting that buzzing sound just for a second there. I heard it.
Oh, I didn't notice it on my side.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me see. So that and I guess we got to have to talk about politics for just a few minutes. Other than what's going on with Ukraine and Russia and the rest of the world, at the risk of people accusing me, because I have been accused of this over the last week, of being pro-Putin and pro-Russia, which I'm not.
No.
But there are really no good guys in a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
And, we don't want Ukraine to be overrun by Russia.
Right.
But at the same time, we know the history of Ukraine over the last 10 years or so, how many of our leading politicians and in our own government and in the business world pretty much set up a puppet government over there and developed it into a cash cow that many of them have become multimillionaires.
Yes.
Milking money out of Ukraine, and your Ukrainian leaders have gone along with it. So there's a long history of corruption there that doesn't make me sympathetic to them as a nation necessarily. It does make me sympathetic to innocent people who are being forced out of their homes and killed. And evidently many in the Russian army their heart's not in it either. It's kind of them being forced to do it. So this thing could quickly become very ugly, either with Russia being embarrassed and having to retreat and go home and try to salvage whatever they can among the other nations, or Putin deciding that he has to triple down, with larger and worse kind of weapons, and just start killing many thousands of people and destroying lots of property and things. You hope it doesn't come to that, which might force other nations to feel like they need to step in. And I was telling at the Bible study last night, I was talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Yes.
And kind of, people ask, why is he doing this? People have known him for 20 or 30 years. Were shocked. They didn't expect him to invade and all that. But the one element that's never brought up, because it's the Bible, of course, is 38:4 of Ezekiel says that at some point, whether it's this or not, at some point, God's going to put hooks in the jaws of some of those people coming against Israel. And the idea is that they're really not wanting to. They're kind of reluctant to even. But God has a timetable. God has a plan to move forward. And at some point, he's going to say, okay, it's time to line up all the dominoes or the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Zechariah 14:2 says, God says, I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem. So I like to explain it this way. It's much like the death of Christ, when Peter said in Acts 2 that, okay, why did Christ die? Well, Peter says one reason why Christ died, it was the determinate counsel of God. It was God's purpose. God was offering his son as a sacrifice for our sin. So why did Christ die? Because it was God's will.
Yeah.
Okay. But then he goes on to say in the same verse, whom you murdered. They were still guilty of murder.
Yes. Yes.
And they were held accountable and will in the judgment day. So those two, what I call the mystery of iniquity and the mystery of godliness, often work side by side in the same events. And so I apply that to what's going on today, that Putin may be, God may actually even be allowing an evil spirit to control Putin. And yet it's God allowing it or even directing it. Because when it says, I will put jaws in your mouth and drag you down there, that's God directly doing it.
Yeah.
So those two things can both be operating at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And will, especially leading up to the Antichrist. Revelation 13:3 says that Satan gives him his power. Other verses talk about he takes his power through flattery and through war. So he has evil purposes. Satan is working through him. And yet Revelation 17:17 says that God put it in their hearts to accomplish his will, that it's going to happen when he wants it to happen. So, okay, why is the man of sin going to come on and do what he does? Well, he's empowered by Satan, but also God's involved in it.
Yes.
Because God is moving forward his plan, even in the evil schemings and plottings of men.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this both may be happening over there right now. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Now we know Israel's not involved yet. We know there's not a 10-nation confederation yet. We know. So a lot about prophecy. This is what throws a lot of people. A lot of things about prophecy have multiple partial fulfillments leading up to a final major fulfillment. So this may not be Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Right.
But it may be a version of it on a smaller scale. And then at some point, God's going to make sure that it grows in scope and includes Israel, and they become the target.
Yeah, and sometimes these things cause people to line up on certain sides. And so the forming of the 10 nations that Daniel speaks of and mentioned in Revelation, 10 horns, 10 kings, 10 toes. It takes an event sometimes to cause people to take sides.
Yes, it does.
And so this might be one of those early markers that caused that, Of course, we know that we don't want to be drawn into this, but we may have, the Americans may be drawn into this to protect their president's personal investments over there.
Well, and many in the business world and financial world.
Yeah.
I mean, that really was, has been developed over the last 8 to 10 years to benefit financially a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who are not part of Ukraine.
Right.
And so it's interesting the way the lines are being drawn now is that if you are not 100% in favor of the government of Ukraine, you are pro-Russia in their minds. You're accused of it. So like you say, if the lines are drawn that bluntly, it may cause some people who say, like Mexico, I just read, said they're not going to go along with the sanctions against Russia. Because they do a lot of business with Russia. China has pretty much said, we're not going to go along with it, at least totally, because we do a lot of business with Russia. So it may cause some who really don't want to take sides, or they want to continue some relationship with Russia because they want it to continue if Russia does something like gets rid of Putin, puts someone else in, they don't want to destroy their long-term relationship.
Yeah.
So, but it may cause some to actually become more pro-Russia than what they would be otherwise, because the other side is kind of pushing them. You got to be on one side or the other totally.
Yes.
And so, for instance, and then there are a lot of people predicting, because what happens is the total focus is on Russia and Ukraine right now. Well, that creates opportunities elsewhere, doesn't it? So, for instance, many are predicting that China is going to take advantage of this situation to take over Taiwan, or some big thing like that over in their part of the world, because the whole world is distracted and they can't react necessarily to two major powers doing something bad at the same time. And then, okay, what else could happen? Well, Iran has been looking for an opportunity, to attack Israel. And so Iran might say, now is the best chance we've had in forever. And so
North Korea might do something.
Or North Korea, So this could set off a number of hot spots around the world because they feel like they have cover from the whole world focusing their attention on Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
So, this could escalate very easily, or it could not. It could die down, like many these kind of things through the years have happened, and you think, okay, is this it?
Yeah.
And then somehow it dies down because, globalism, as much as we dislike it on many levels, because we know what it's going to lead to. It's going to lead to the Tower of Babel being rebuilt. And so, but globalism in their minds has the advantage of we're so interconnected financially with trade and everything that we won't go over the top like with nuclear weapons or something, because we don't want to destroy our own economy, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's what they're hoping. And we just don't know how it's going to turn out, but it sure raises a lot of prophetic questions, doesn't it?
Yes.
Does this fit into scripture somehow, into prophecy? And in some way it does, but it may not be the ultimate fulfillment of it. It may just move it along another few notches.
Yeah. And that's what Jesus said. You're going to hear wars and rumors of wars. So these things are
not yet.
Yeah.
Because the end is not yet until Israel is in the center of the aggression.
Yeah.
And so that's why we can say not yet.
Yeah. But if you're a pre-trib person, you don't have to worry about any of this. You're going to be gone anyway. So, I mean.
Yeah, right. Yeah. As I said last night at Bible study, one of my reasons to not hold to the imminent, any moment rapture and return of Christ is, one is short term, Peter could not preach the imminent return of Christ because the Lord told him at the end of John, you're going to grow old and someone else is going to carry you.
Yes. Yeah.
So Peter knew he had at least 30 or 40 more years. And yet he said in 1 Peter 4:7 that the coming of the Lord is at hand. But he didn't mean any moment because he wasn't old and being carried by anyone yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then the long-term reason I gave is that pre-tribulation rapture does not say that the rapture triggers the start of the 7 years, but in some way it is so closely connected to the start of the 70th week, the signing of the peace treaty between Antichrist and Israel, that it's almost as if it must trigger it in some way, because even those who hold to that position say that the tribulation does begin very soon or immediately after the rapture. So, and my point was simply this: from 70 AD until 1948, there was no nation of Israel for the Antichrist to sign a peace treaty with. So it could not be imminent between those two dates. Now, after 1948, maybe some could argue that it has become imminent, but imminence teaches that he could have come back 1 minute after he left and not violated any prophecy.
Yeah.
Well, it would have violated, him telling Peter, you're going to grow old and be carried by someone else.
Yes.
It couldn't happen during that stretch. And I think it couldn't happen until at least 1948, so that Israel could be attacked, Antichrist could rise up and sign a peace treaty between them and the other nations and enter into the 70th week. So those are some reasons that prevent the idea of imminence in my mind.
Yeah. And no matter how hard we wish that we're not going to be in it, that's not going to make it go away, or our involvement in it go away.
Well, for the benefit of our listeners, I'm going to need to ask you to pause for a few moments. I am here alone. My dog is in the other part of the house, barking at the top of her lungs, saying, "It is time for you forgot to feed me before you got online." So it's going to continue all through our session. I may as well go ahead and take care of it right now.
All right, I'll hit pause. Okay. We're back on.
Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted by my dog? The problem is she's so old and spoiled that her feed bowl, and then we have a water bowl next to it. But usually when she eats, she would rather go outside and drink out of the water tub we have set up for her outside. So don't be surprised if in a minute or two she's barking at the back door to be let out. So there might be a few pauses in this session.
We have a dog, so we totally understand.
How our dogs train us well, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Anyway, we should maybe talk a little bit about where we are in the book of Exodus. We could talk all day about current events and how they might fit into the Bible, but God's deliverance of his people out of Egypt through his great power is really the story of the Great Tribulation, and how that he's going to, we believe, allow his people to go through that period of time, and he's going to come and deliver us through tribulation, not from tribulation, and defeat his enemies and rescue his saints and set up his kingdom. As I said last night in our Bible study, we're talking about the kingdom, and a lot of people say that the kingdom is, all that the kingdom is now present. Might be the church, it might be God's rule in your heart, those kind of views of the kingdom. But as I tried to explain, that whatever principle of the kingdom that can be experienced right now, Hebrews 6:5 says, we have tasted the powers of the age to come.
Mm-hmm.
So we can live in the experience of the kingdom to some degree in this life, but the kingdom in its full display, or the fullness of what it means, is not going to happen until the king returns, defeats his enemies, and sets up his rule over the earth. And the best way I can explain it is Daniel 2:44 and 45, where that vision that Nebuchadnezzar had of that image of the great Gentile empires, and throughout the dream and interpretation, God made Daniel understand, and he explained that until that stone made without hands strikes that image at its feet, and the whole image comes crumbling down, never to rise again, and that stone is then turned into a great kingdom that will last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Until that happens, the kingdom is not yet.
Right.
It cannot be. Well, what's going on over in Ukraine and Russia right now? What are the world powers trying to do? What are the great Gentile leaders of the world trying to do right now? So that image has not been destroyed yet.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that stone that turns into a great kingdom
Mm-hmm.
has not been set up yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
To me, that's the kind of the easiest way to explain that what should I say? The fullness, the full reality of what the kingdom is yet future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But the kingdom is at hand. We can still
Mm-hmm.
say right now the kingdom is at hand,
Mm-hmm.
because the kingdom is as near as the king.
Mm-hmm.
And if you receive the king in some way, you're going to receive the kingdom.
Yes.
And so the kingdom, as I like to explain that little term at hand, it's within reach.
Mm-hmm.
It's available. It's always
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the kingdom as it's described, with Christ ruling over the nations with his people in their glorified bodies, that doesn't mean that that is going to happen any moment.
Yeah.
But an individual's experience in the reality of the kingdom can be experienced now when they, as John and Jesus and the church, all three had the same message: repent.
Mm-hmm.
The kingdom is at hand.
Yeah.
So when a person repents and receives the king into their heart,
Yeah.
if you have the king, you have the kingdom in some way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the way to explain that at hand. And what I did last night is I went through all those Old Testament passages that explain that the day of the Lord
Mm-hmm.
is at hand. And yet, Moses said it in Deuteronomy 32:35, 3,500 years ago. Isaiah said it 2,700 years ago. And yet they both said it was at hand. And God knew that the day of the Lord was not going to be any moment.
Mm-hmm.
He knew it was going to be far off. So we don't want to accuse God of purposely confusing people, making us think that it could be any moment. But in some sense, the day of the Lord principles of God's judgment, God's anger, God's rescuing his people, all that the day of the Lord represents, could happen at any time.
Yeah.
On a smaller scale, principles of it.
Mm-hmm.
But what the day of the Lord means in its fullness, just like the kingdom in its fullness, the day of the Lord is the actual return of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
defeating his enemies, rescuing his saints, setting up his kingdom, ruling over the earth.
Yeah.
That's the day of the Lord.
Yes.
And yet, many Old Testament verses say it's at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So my whole point last night was, it's easy to take all those New Testament verses that speak about his return and the end and the kingdom and all that as at hand, and say, well, that means it could be any moment. But if you force yourself to go back and realize that terminology, as I gave those lessons on the unity of terminology. That terminology is lifted directly from the Old Testament about at hand or near.
Yes.
And if you go back and read all of those, it gives you a broader idea of what at hand means.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
From last night, but
have you converted it into? Well, of course you recorded it, but is it ready? Is it on your site yet?
No.
Your Facebook, not yet.
No, the video needs to be sent to me. I haven't downloaded the audio recording yet, and I need to put a document up of all my notes. I'm going to send all those things out at once.
Okay.
Things. So I'll hope to do that in the next few days.
Well, we're going to find ourselves in the wilderness with God's people. And you mentioned your dog and the water situation. We're going to find that a bunch of people are barking because they don't have water.
Let's just start today's the part we really need to get to. People watching this are going to say, "I wish you'd stayed with what you were talking about on current events and other things." But but we have to make ourselves go back and have some continuity to our previous sessions.
Yes,
and talk about some other things. I want to start today. We finally got Israel out of Egypt, and they're over on the far side of the Red Sea, and God has destroyed the armies of Egypt in the Red Sea. And they are at this what now moment. What now?
What now?
Yeah, we've been set free. What now?
Yeah.
And they didn't handle their freedom too well. They at several points said we'd rather be slaves in Egypt and have what we had there than to be free in the wilderness and have what we have here. And that's just a wrong-headed view of things, but that's the view that they had.
Well, it's kind of like a teenager who moves out and gets his own place, and he comes to realize that the fridge isn't automatically stocked.
Yeah. I go to the gym with a group of people I've gotten to be friends with. I take these group classes, and this one man, he's about 10 older than me, and he's a preacher. He ran a seminary over in the Philippines for a number of years. He pastored a number of churches here on the West Coast. He grew up on a farm outside of Spokane, and just a really intelligent, really very nice man. We talk about the Bible quite a bit. And he told me a while back, he said, I wrote a book a number of years ago to help people where I was pastoring and doing mission work and things. So in the Philippines and churches here. And he said, I haven't seen it. I don't even know if it's available still. But I like the title. And he said, the title of it is for new converts who have been saved and newly baptized and just come to the church. The title of the little book is Now That You're Dry. Now that's a great title, isn't it?
I like that.
What now? Now that you're dry.
Yes.
What now?
Yes.
So they, a couple of big dramatic things happened to them. The Passover, the plagues and the Passover, and the death angel passing over them, killing the firstborn of the Egyptians. That was a really big dramatic event. And then crossing the Red Sea was a big dramatic event. Very emotional, very powerful. And, I think anytime a person is first saved, that should be a big dramatic event.
Yes.
And then when they're baptized, that should be a big dramatic event. And, but then after that, now that you're dry, you have a journey to make, a path to follow, learning what God wants you to do from that point till the day of your death. And that's where we're at with Israel. They're through the water, facing the wilderness, headed toward the promised land. they're really uncertain about it. They do have a godly, experienced leader in Moses, and of course, God directing him. So it's easy for us to pick on them, saying they should have been more settled and confident and stronger in faith, not complaining all the time. But when you say that, God just holds up a mirror in front of our face and say, look at yourself.
Yes.
You're not too different.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So we have to be careful, don't we?
Well, they were complaining that their fridge wasn't full anymore. The garlics and the leeks and the onions, they just weren't there.
And all we have is this dry, almost tasteless, although one place it says that the manna was like coriander, which is like cilantro. So I say it's a cross between wheat thins and tortilla chips.
And what's wrong with that?
And that's not too bad, unless that's all you ate every day for years. Then you think, oh my word, Lord, can I at least have some guacamole and refried beef to dip it in?
That's where the garlic. That's where they were missing the garlics and the leeks and the onions.
The salsa ingredient.
The salsa. Oh.
So you kind of sympathize with them in a way. They said, can we at least have some meat? He said, okay, I'm going to give you meat till it comes out in your nostrils. You're going to be throwing it up.
Oh, boy.
Did you ever get sick to your stomach and throw up on manna? No, it's pretty bland, Lord. Okay, I'm going to give you something that's going to make you sick to your stomach.
Yeah. Tastes great, but.
It's good. So I want to read some verses in Psalm 106 to get started. Psalm 106, verses 4 through 15. And it kind of summarizes a lot of what we're trying to get to. Psalm 106, verse 4. Remember me, O Lord, with the favor you have toward your people. O visit me with your salvation, that I may see the benefit. See, they didn't see the benefit, did they? We often don't see the benefit. That I may see the benefit of your chosen ones, your saints, your elect ones. That I may rejoice in the gladness of your nation, your holy nation. That I may glory with your inheritance. So, Mike, you want a good 3-point outline? Psalm 106:5. Number 1, the benefit of the chosen ones. Number 2, the gladness of your nation rejoices. And number 3, the glory of your inheritance. That's a good 3-point sermon right there.
Yes. Yes.
And I have confidence in you. You can develop that and then send me the outline so I can preach it.
They say there's nothing free.
I've tried to preach those sermon outlines that don't require any study or prayer. The Lord makes sure I don't make that mistake too often.
Yes.
Verse 6, we have sinned with our fathers. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedly. Our fathers in Egypt did not understand your wonders. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
They saw all those plagues.
Yeah.
They understood what was going on. So it's a deeper meaning here.
Yeah.
They really didn't apply it in their hearts. They really didn't contemplate on exactly what God was trying to do for them. It didn't have the kind of impact that it should have had. They did not remember the multitude of your mercies, but rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. That's interesting too.
Yes.
So we usually put them on the far side of the Red Sea before we start talking about their lack of faith and sin and complaints and all that. But it started before they crossed the Red Sea.
Yes, it did.
That's Exodus 14,
Yeah.
From the armies of Egypt, and there's the Red Sea in front of them. Those maps, those diagrams that you put up last session really shows that they're on that open area just before the Red Sea, and the little path behind them through the mountains, and the armies of Egypt are bearing down on them. They're trapped between them and the Red Sea. So they turn to Moses, instead of saying, the same God who delivered us with the Passover blood and the plagues. Just let us know when you're ready, Moses. What are you going to deliver us this time? No, they said, did you bring us out here to die?
Yeah.
We wish we were still slaves in Egypt rather than be here and die by armies.
Mm.
And that's when God told Moses to say, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord.
Yes.
But yet, so they had already sinned before they got out of Egypt.
Yeah. A prelude of what was coming.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm. Nevertheless, he saved them
with
this for his name's sake.
For his, yes.
Doing it so much for you people. You've already kind of turned against me. But I'm doing it because I made some promises to your fathers that I'm going to.
Yeah, absolutely.
That he might make his mighty power known. He rebuked the Red Sea also. It dried up. He led them through the depths, through the wilderness. He saved them from the hand of him who hated them and redeemed them from the hand of their enemy. The waters covered their enemies. There was not one of them left.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my second pause. My spoiled dog is barking to go out. Okay. So
let me pause it.
Okay. So I guess our viewers don't realize, but we had to pause a few times. And so hopefully we can just kind of pick back up where we were. But it says in Psalm 106 and 11, the waters cover their enemies. There was not one of them left. Then they believed his words. They sang his praise. Okay, that's where we're getting to today.
Yes.
The Song of Moses in Exodus 15. And this is interesting. The way it's worded, and if we go in a minute to look at the Song of Moses, there's two songs of Moses, aren't there? There's this one in Deuteronomy 32 at the end of Moses' life, at the end of their journey. Both of them are called the Song of Moses. But this one in Exodus 15 seems to have risen naturally out of their hearts. That what they just experienced was so overwhelming emotionally that the way they expressed that emotion was in song.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like that idea that when we first come to know the Lord, and we usually in our church services, probably yours too, someone comes forward and says they've been saved, we sing a song, come around and hug their necks, shake their hands and everything. We're glad.
Yes.
And we want to sing about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we do the same thing when they're baptized. We celebrate.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they were doing here, is that they were singing praises to God because of his great deliverance. Now, the one in Deuteronomy 32, actually at the end of chapter 31, that Song of Moses, God tells him to write it down. Mm-hmm. That's a song from God to teach them. He said, I want you to teach them this song. And unfortunately, he said, part of the reasons that I want them to learn this song is as a witness against themselves. Because there's a lot in Deuteronomy 32 that speaks about God's anger and judgment against them that was really throughout their history. And so that song was directed to them by God. Mm-hmm. This song seems to have just risen up naturally out of their own hearts.
Yeah, spontaneous.
Yeah, spontaneous. So they sang his praise. They soon forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel. That's interesting too, isn't it?
Yes.
So many times in the wilderness, they acted and reacted to things without first praying to God or asking God what his advice was.
Yes. Yeah.
And unfortunately, we do that often, don't we? Mm-hmm. Now, and then later we'll say something like, well, God gave us a brain and God gave us wisdom and God gave us principles. And so, I didn't feel like I needed to pray and ask God for his direction. Well, that's often a mistake.
Yes, it is.
So it's always best when you have a major decision, need to react to something pretty big, stop, and pray about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I read one time, one man back in the Middle Ages or something, he said, he woke up in the morning, he said, I have so much I have to get done today, that I'm facing big things today, that I'll never get it all done unless I spend an hour in prayer first. And there's some truth to that, isn't there?
Yeah. And today, as I have so much to do, I don't have time to pray.
I don't have time to pray. Oh. And then at the end of the day, you think, why did everything go so bad? Nothing worked out like I hoped it would. What's that song we sing? Did you think to pray? Something
yes. Like that. After the fact, usually when the day collapses.
So they soon forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness, tested God in the desert. One place says that they tested him 10 times. Mm-hmm. Of course, the purpose of the journey was for him to test them for the purpose of strengthening their faith.
Yes.
God wanted to test them for their good. They ended up trying to test God, and it was for their harm, as it says back to this when they requested meat. He gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. Mm-hmm. I've used that verse a lot through the years, because sometimes God lets us ask for things we shouldn't ask for, but he gives them to us anyway to teach us a lesson. Mm-hmm. That, okay, I'm going to give it to you, but you need to learn that it actually does harm.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, people ask for, you know, maybe a bigger income or bigger house or whatever they ask for. And it ends up a negative effect in their spiritual life.
Yeah. Has a reverse effect.
Lord, give me a better job, even if I have to work on Sunday.
Yes.
Sometimes God allows it.
Yeah.
And then they look back years later and think, that's when my downward slide started.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Be careful what you ask for.
Amen. Yeah.
So we'll stop there in Psalm 106, because that brings us up to where we are. And we'll just, we won't spend a lot of time on the Song of Moses, because we kind of chased a lot of rabbits today. But back in Exodus 15 is where we'll be. And it says that in verse 1, then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord. So as you said, it was spontaneous, singing to the Lord. And that's what we are told to do, isn't it? Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord.
Yes.
I'm glad that's in there.
Yes.
The Lord knows how many wrong notes I hit. And he doesn't care if I'm actually singing to him in my heart. Mm-hmm. Whereas other people around me are not maybe as forgiving.
Well, yeah. Because how many of those Hebrews out there in the wilderness do you think had music lessons prior to leaving Egypt?
When it says in 15:1, I kind of looked this up in the Hebrew language, and it seems to be borne out. I don't want to make too much of it, but I think it fits. When it says, I will sing to the Lord, the Hebrew allows it to also mean I must sing. In other words, the emotions were so overwhelming, they felt compelled to sing to the Lord. Mm. So it's a little stronger force behind it. Mm-hmm. I must sing to the Lord. Why? Because he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. And if you start reading down through this, it's a tribute to God for his deliverance, but it describes him, for instance, in verse 3, the Lord is a man of war. So he's described as the great, as you have said in recent lessons, the general of their army. Mm-hmm. military commander. He's a man of war. And this is one of those statements. And the Lord later, throughout their history, they were a nation, and so they had to fight other nations quite often. And God bless them if they were depending on him. But some people, that take all of that and take a statement like this to promote that God approves of violence and war and fighting other people and things like that. And this is one of those places where, we say in the way we look at the Bible that the church is, I call it a continuity, but with some discontinuity in Israel. So it's a continuation of the elect remnant and the promises given to Abraham. But it doesn't mean everything about the way God wanted Israel as a nation to operate, he wants us to operate today. In this case, it's churches. There's a certain type of war we take part in, but it's not, we do not fight against flesh and blood, Paul said.
Right.
Principalities and powers.
Yeah.
And so, and again, this is where it can get a little confused. People take this as, like what we might face in the future. Well, I'm going to buy all the guns I can, stock up on all the food I can. If someone comes to my door and wants to take my food, I'm going to shoot them dead. Well, it's okay to defend your property.
Yeah.
If it means a gun, okay. But the Bible doesn't describe the saints in the tribulation taking up weapons against the Antichrist.
Right.
They love not their lives to the death. They allow themselves to be persecuted and killed. And Paul never took a weapon against those who arrested him, beat up on him, tried to kill him and all that. He did not advocate the other saints to do that. And so my point is real simple. You can't take everything about the way God instructed the nation of Israel to operate and apply that directly to the church today.
Yeah. And even the saints aren't really seen as an army or described as an army until they're in the sky with Jesus.
Yes.
Returning.
Yeah. The armies of heaven returning.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That's when we get to fight. Finally, Lord, you let us fight.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I had to wait till you're in your glorified, indestructible bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. But then there's no losing.
And just when we're ready to engage the enemy,
yeah.
our sword goes out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Come on, Lord, let me take part in it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So he's described as a man of war. Military ideas are in this Song of Moses. And I did notice also in this that the Lord's personal name, the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters, is used 14 times in this little song. And it's only, 18 verses. And yet his personal name is used 14 times. So it's a tribute to Yahweh, who delivered them as he promised. The deliverer, the leader, the protector, the warrior, the provider. And Christ will be all those things in Revelation 19.
Yes.
When he comes back on that white horse. So it says he has triumphed gloriously. And I think there's a reason why, in fact, we may go turn there right now. Revelation 15:3, why the saints will be singing the Song of Moses in connection to the return of Christ. Because a song will instantly rise up in our hearts in our resurrection. And we will once again say, he has triumphed gloriously.
Yes. Yes.
So Revelation 15:3, those who had gotten the victory over the beast, over his image, over his mark, over the number of his name. And how did they get the victory? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the testimony that they had, and they loved not their lives to the death.
Mm-hmm.
So how'd they get the victory? Through death, through martyrdom.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, God's version of victory is sometimes different than ours.
Yes, absolutely.
Standing on the sea of glass and fire in verse 1. It's the sea of fire and glass. That's a pretty amazing picture you can draw in your mind. Standing on a sea of fire and glass.
Yes.
Having harps of God. There's the harps that we sing about.
Yep.
And they sing the song of Moses. So we're not going to learn a new song. We're going to learn a song that's already in the Bible.
Wow.
Isn't that
Yes.
amazing?
Yes.
And so then the question arises when you read it. It's also called the Song of the Lamb. But when you read it, verses 3 and 4, it's not that easy to determine, is it the Song of Moses in Exodus 15 or the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32? And it seems to be a blend of both. But maybe the emphasis, even though there seems to be more direct quotes from Deuteronomy 32 verses 3 and 4, but the idea of it is more the Song of Moses in Exodus 15 of God, not as much he is the judge in Deuteronomy 32, but in Exodus 15 he's more the warrior, the one, the deliverer. So it's a kind of a blend of both. And so it says, great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty, just and true are your ways, O King of the saints. It's an interesting phrase, isn't it?
Yes.
King of the saints. Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy, for all nations shall come and worship before you. That's Zechariah 14, isn't it?
Yeah.
And for your judgments have been manifested. So, this Song of Moses, we say, well, that's what Israel sang, and it's for them and all that. God delivered them from Egypt. But that same emotion, that same sentiment, that same mindset is going to be ours.
Yes.
When we meet the Lord in the air and return with him as the armies of heaven.
If we look at this picture, both Old and New Testament, Moses and the children of Israel, and Jesus and his gathered saints, really we're seeing at one end of the spectrum, him beginning to make good on his promises to Abraham and carving out a people for his namesake, known as the Kingdom of Israel. And then, of course, all of their history, ups and downs and such. And then we look at Revelation, we see the climax of him gathering a people for his name, the saints. And so we're looking really at one thread, just the earlier beginning of that thread and the consummation of that thread, having formed a people for his name. And both are sandwiched by this, as you said, this spontaneous or this outbreak of Jubilee. And really the song is wrapped up in victory. And so whether it's taught or whether it's spontaneous, it's so much of this is tied in with a victory of their God over the enemy. So even the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem by David, they were dancing and singing. It was a victory. It was an honor to Yahweh, their God.
Yeah, there's a time to celebrate, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yes.
Yeah. He says here in 15:4, Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. So the best that Pharaoh could throw at them, and they were defenseless. Evidently, at that point, Israel had no weapons of war. They may have on the other side, but at least they were ill prepared to face this greatest army on the earth, probably at that time. So the best Pharaoh could throw at them was nothing to God.
Yes.
And the same thing is going to be repeated at the return of Christ. Real interesting verse in Revelation 19 and 19. And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies. So the best that this world has to offer as far as military capability. And depending on how far into the future this happens, at least 7 years, with the advancements that are taking place because of this tech age that we're living in, what kind of weapons will he have at that point? Far beyond probably what we have right now.
I'm thinking drones are going to be in the picture somehow.
Drones. And I get this, well, going ahead and reading this verse. It says, they are gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. So God gathers the nations against Jerusalem in Zechariah 14:2. And at some point, God's going to protect us, at least 1/3 of Israel, making sure they get through. And at some point, whoever's in charge of all those armies, the Antichrist being the ultimate leader, is going to say, and the Bible seems to teach that, when in the sixth seal, I believe it is, when the leaders of the earth, it says they hide us, called to the rocks to fall on us, hide us from the face of him.
Yes.
Who sits on his throne. It appears to me that at some point, just before his return, he allows people on earth to see him leaving heaven, heading to the earth, and the saints are caught up to meeting in the air. But somehow God allows the people on the earth to be seeing this happen. And in my mind, the head of these armies at some point is going to say, don't point your missiles and weapons at Jerusalem anymore. Point them skyward. We must try with the best weapons that we have to stop him from reaching the earth, or we are doomed.
Yes.
Satan has empowered Antichrist, and Satan knows what's going on at this point.
Yes.
And it's like one last final effort. If I can stop him from making it to the earth, then I win.
Yes.
And I see that the greatest weapons ever created by man pointed at Christ on his white horse and the armies coming with him. And maybe they even have time to set those missiles off and they are headed skyward. I don't know. And then, like you said, drones, or maybe by that time, weaponized satellites. So even further up. So, in stages, missiles from the earth, drones in the atmosphere, satellites up in even further up, that they're going to say, unleash everything on him on that white horse. We have to stop him. And just as easily as God destroyed the greatest weapons and army of Egypt in the Red Sea, it's going to be just as easy for Christ on his white horse to defeat their efforts.
Yes.
And to destroy them.
Yes, absolutely.
Correlation here.
Oh, amen.
And I like what it says in verse 20. The beast was captured. So it's not like Christ on his white horse, still up in the atmosphere, just casting the Antichrist into the lake of fire. Evidently, maybe this is where we come in. I don't know, but I don't know that even in glorified bodies, if we're powerful enough to accomplish this, unless he gives us the power. But in some way, that Antichrist is going to be captured. I don't know how that was manifested, but and then he was cast alive, but only after he was captured.
There's been a verse that has puzzled me. when Jesus is seen after having already landed, of course, the touchdown spot is the Mount of Olives, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then at some point after that, he's seen coming from Basra,
Mm-hmm.
leading people, and his garments have already been stained with their blood.
Yeah,
So
not his blood, but their blood.
right. So it seems that maybe there's been some military expedition that's taken place. You know,
Yeah, the pre-wrath, post-tribulation position gets into that quite a bit.
oh, really?
Where they place the final bowls of wrath, that we are actually raptured or resurrected to him in the air
Uh-huh.
at the beginning of those bowls of wrath, and that they are poured out in rapid succession, and that Christ actually comes to the earth and does literal battle with the Antichrist and his armies, and that it might include this, mysterious 1335 extra 75 days or 45 days at the end of Daniel, that there may be a very short period of time where he's pouring out the bowls of wrath from the atmosphere, us with him, and then comes to the earth and does the mop-up work on the earth, and journeys from, maybe touches down at the Mount of Olives, splits it in two so Israel can be rescued, and then goes to Basra and starts a mop-up effort working his way back to Jerusalem.
Mm.
That's often how it's explained, and it's also a way to avoid trying to explain, 1 Thessalonians 5:9, how we're not appointed to wrath,
Mm-hmm.
and how can we still be here during the bowls of wrath if we're not appointed to wrath? It's kind of a way around having to deal with that difficult, and that we actually are caught up maybe at the end of 1260 days, and then he actually doesn't enter Jerusalem as conquering king until 1290 or 1335. And that short period of time is when he's doing all this, getting his garment bloody and capturing the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
It does seem to be kind of a physical capturing of him in some way. I'm not sold on that position. I think there are some problems with it, but it is a solution to some of those difficult passages.
Mm-hmm. Seems like whichever avenue we take, there's always some stickling point.
It's a way to juggle, or a way to deal with holding to a post-tribulation rapture, but escaping the wrath.
Mm-hmm.
Both,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
anyway.
Yeah. I haven't really delved into it like that. Do you have anything prepared on that, or have you had to?
Yeah, and I have some books on it, and different stuff on the internet I found in my own studies. I'll try to look. It's been a while, so I'll look that up. But yeah, it's so that opens up, and I've even watched some on the internet, debates between two men who both have a post-tribulation view.
Mm-hmm.
The one is called a pre-wrath post-tribulation. The other is just that the saints are still here when the wrath of God is poured out. They're just protected from it in some way.
Okay.
And that position would say, as I have, you look closely at those verses in Revelation about the pouring out of the bowls of wrath,
Mm-hmm.
and it's targeted wrath.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It specifically says upon the throne of the beast, or only upon those who have taken the mark.
Mm-hmm.
And so you scratch your head on that. You say, well, very specific language that the wrath is being poured out, but evidently some are being protected from it.
Yeah, similar to Goshen. Where they had the light and Egypt didn't.
Yeah. So as you say, both positions, even though both are post-tribulation, both are ways to try to handle a few of the little difficulties that come along.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, this is very good. Very good.
Yeah, the Song of I didn't want us to skip over the Song of Moses because it really is quite prophetic. I mean, the fact that Revelation 15 says we're going to sing the Song of Moses tells me that if we're studying anything about prophecy or about Christ or about his return or anything, we need to look at the Song of Moses. I do want to point out just a couple quick things, and then we'll close out on this. In verse 13, you in your mercy have led forth the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength to your holy habitation.